Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. I just went like full radio voice there.
You did.
Nasally. So we are here with one of my good friends, Rebecca Taylor. We'll explain a little bit why we're good friends. Here also with my co-host, Aaron. I was about to call you Aaron Magnuson, one of our guests, but you're Aaron Mercer. And then there's Aaron McGinnis. So
I know, there's a lot of Aarons to live up to.
And then our producer, Nathan. We are closing a series from Northeastern Seminary. Thank you for our sponsors. And we are brought to you by Browncroft Community Church on spiritual practices. So what we want to talk about today is, why does serving help us realize our spiritual gifts? One of the things I love about our guest is we had this pre-conversation of like, serving, spiritual gifts, is it really volunteering and talents? So some of these are churchy words, we get that, but I think most of us would say, hey, I want to make a difference, I want to know how I'm wired, and if there is a God, like, I want to be who I've created to be. So that's kind of where we're going. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm excited about the conversation. I'm, looking forward to getting all my questions answered about, what I'm supposed to be doing. So, no, I think it's I think spiritual gifts is a really important topic, certainly an important topic in the church, but I think it's something people wonder about. They might not say spiritual gifts, but they might say, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I wired for? Like you just said, Peter. So I'm excited about this. Yeah. Thanks for being with us.
Oh man, there's so much good things to talk about.
By the way, I'm excited too, because even though Peter knows you already, I don't really know you. Beyond Facebook, which is where we learn, we meet people on Facebook during COVID, and you don't really know that person yet. So yeah. I get to hear more of your story.
I'm excited to tell it.
Hey, one of the reasons it's so great to interview you is you have this very dynamic story, and where I want you to kind of walk people through with this question is, you go from being a biology major to now you're working for a seminary.
Yeah.
Walk us through that.
Well, I think it even goes back to why I was going for the biology degree. I was going to be a doctor, an MD or a PA or a PhD and an MD. I was exploring all of these things. I was a single mom, and I didn't want to have to depend on anybody in order to provide for her. So I had big dreams, and this was something that I felt that God had laid on my heart to do. Early on, my dad had always spoken life over me and leadership qualities over me, so I'm thankful for that. And then I met my husband, and he was a firefighter and a paramedic and a volunteer, and he had a very wonderful heart to serve his community that I wanted to be a part of. He was an amazing giver. And then we got married and we started having babies. And I was like, I think I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. And we joke about how, I went from being a doctor to being a stay-at-home mom for a long time. But that biology degree was something that I never really used, because we decided at the time I was going to stay home and care for the kids, and he was going to continue to do the work that he was doing. And so from there, he always encouraged me to do something, to give, to volunteer, because that was his pattern. He was a volunteer for a very long time as an EMT. And so I used to volunteer at church, in mom's ministry, and in other ways. And then when the kids got older, I was a photographer. During that time, I had taught myself how to do photography. And I learned how to do video, mainly because the church that I was attending needed somebody to do that. Mm. So I was a volunteer that went in about 20 hours a week to the church that we were attending. And I learned how to do all these amazing things because they were very volunteer-based. They had a small staff and were very reliant on their volunteers. They were also very great at raising up leaders and equipping people. And so I came up under that leadership, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
How did you even know that you wanted to go that direction? I mean, did you just see a need and you wanted to fill it, or were you already kind of artistically inclined? What drew you that direction? My
family makes fun of me because I don't remember anything about biology. So it is a family joke because I am in a creative field mostly, right? Yeah. But what I'm finding now in my job at Northeastern Seminary, where here at Browncroft, I feel like my role when I was the director of creative services and technology, my role was primarily creative. It was working with Rob and Pastor Rob and brainstorming these things, right? It was a very creative role. And then I started working at Northeastern, and they started looking at me differently. They said, your science background actually informs your creativity. they kind of saw the connection between how I was a creative that also liked numbers and wanted to understand the science behind things. And it's a really interesting full circle perspective for me now to realize that, I mean, I'm 46 and my gifts now all feel like they fit. I don't know.
That's really cool.
It's a good place to be.
Well, I kind of want to back up. Tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you're at a good place that you kind of know, hey, I know what I'm good at. I even know what my spiritual gifts are. Do you feel like 20 years from now you'll be more confident, or were the past seasons, we'll say the last 20 years, was that more deciphering, or I already knew I had these, it's to develop them?
That's a good question. I would have said in my 20s, I knew everything. So I was very confident. And I'm finding the older I get, the more I question not who I am. I think I understand myself more who I am now than I ever have in the past. But I sort of question my approach to things and maybe how I'm interacting with people than I used to. I used to have right systems and processes, right? And those led me to certain things in my life. But now I sort of look at the relationships and I say, how am I going to make this relationship right?
You gotta say more. Give us an example of that.
Well, so in my early years, my theology was very strong. I grew up in church. I grew up under good pastors, and I looked at things very black and white. Our Bible is so clear. How many times have I said, oh, it's biblical, right? We do that a lot in church. That's another religious word, or however we word that in church. But now I'm starting to understand that God is, Jesus especially, is about relationships. And he served people. It's interesting. And you guys I ask questions all the time now. Did Jesus ever talk specifically about spiritual gifts like Paul did? Paul talks a lot about spiritual gifts, right? Speaking in tongues, prophesying, all these things, leadership, elders, deacons, all these things. But did Jesus ever really talk about those things? Because our topic is serving. Jesus served in a perfectness. He was perfect. But that doesn't mean that he didn't, one, work with the Holy Spirit, and two, he had a way of serving without letting people know that he was in a superior place for them. Does that make sense? Like sometimes we serve out of superiority. Oh, I'm gifted in making videos, Aaron. Of course I'm going to make the videos here, right? Like that was my talent and my ability. But sometimes serving is cleaning the toilets, even though I'm good at video, or loving somebody who maybe comes in and feels unlovable because of how they've been treated in the past in the church. Serving and using my spiritual gifts isn't just about the tasks that I can accomplish, but it's about how I make people feel.
I think you just hit on a really interesting, I think there's a lot interesting in there to dig into, but you kind of made a distinction just now. You didn't say this, but it's what I heard. And I'd love to dig into it a little more. You made a distinction between the actual serving, the project itself, and then the spirit or the heart, something inside of you that informs that energizes that. So what's the title for this is serving and spiritual gifts, and so what's the difference between actually a talent and a spiritual gift, and how does one inform the other, or should they inform one another? That's, I guess, where would you go with that?
I guess, okay, so let's back up and talk a little bit about who I am, like my makeup. Peter taught me many years ago about Enneagrams, and I was super skeptical at the time because I didn't like being put in a box. I felt like personality tests put people in boxes, right? Which turns out that because I'm in number 8, which is called a challenger, that is pretty typical behavior for a challenger. Thankfully, Peter knew that and was very gracious about my conversations early on about the Enneagram. But I often look at challenging systems and understanding how to fix a problem, right? I'm a doer. I am not a beer. This conversation stuff that we're doing right now, not my jam. I'd much rather make this happen for 7 other speakers, right? Like people that come in and do their thing, because I like to do things. And so what I'm learning is I'm learning to be. I'm learning to be quiet. I'm learning to listen to what God is speaking to me, and I'm learning how to love people in a different way. Now, that also means that I'm challenging other people in ways that I never challenged them before, because I also, even though I am a challenger in my Enneagram type, I am also a person that likes to use inspiration. I don't really love conflict per se. I like to inspire people to see something that needs to happen. And sometimes, especially in the last year, I've realized that part of what I need to do is not just inspire people, but also challenge them. And I don't know that that's a spiritual gift, but I know that everywhere Jesus went, he created conflict because he was calling people into a relationship with himself. He was calling them into intimacy with himself. And I don't know, did Rebecca Letterman talk about that? Because that is a really big topic in her class that I just took last semester. She has a great way of describing how Jesus has this perfect balance of conflict and intimacy, right? It's a really big theme in her class called Being Human, and it changed me.
You're going to have to listen to last week's episode. That's all I got to say, because it's in there. I want to hone on something really specific. So, you know, Aaron kind of rolls his eyes when he hears the Enneagram, so maybe you can become like Rebecca.
No, see, I loved that you went there, because Peter is often bringing up the Enneagram with me, and I know that there's actually a podcast that is specifically, there's at least one specifically.
Marilyn Vansel.
So go check it out. I'm talking
Sean
to the audience
Palmer.
here.
Right.
But I love that you went there, because I'm, you know, a lot of people are always like, you need to take the Enneagram, you need to take the, and you know, I'm curious about personality tests too. I've taken more than my fair share in the day. I haven't done that one yet. And then there's spiritual gift assessments too,
Right.
and that you know, that sounds like a very churchy thing. It is a very churchy thing. But I would love to get back to that at some point about what you think about all of those. But
Okay.
let's let Peter ask his question.
Well, no, I love this. I'm gonna get super specific. So one of the things that, you know, Enneagram teachers would say, one female 8 challengers is like the most difficult, and the second to that would be male 2s.
Did he just call me difficult?
I think it sounded like
I
that.
didn't call you
is
difficult.
what I'm-
I am gonna cite Ian Morgan Crone, Suzanne Stabile. I'm just, you know,
It's
they-
okay, audience. You can just rewind a little bit.
you know,
Yeah,
you just rewind. So like 8 females, because just in our culture, there's kind of this idea, and you can unpack that. And for 2s, it's kind of like a male 2 that's really sensitive. So I think we're both kind of coming into this as not necessarily fitting that.
Right.
There's a set of spiritual gifts that you probably fit in this prophetic. And when I say prophetic, I'm not saying, you know, foretelling the future, but
Sure.
it's kind of forth, like you said, hey, I don't necessarily like conflict, but if it's needed, let's do it.
Right.
Talk about your experience of, as a woman, as a challenger,
Yeah.
as someone in church, because what I'm hearing from you is, I'm trying to figure out who God made me to be. I obviously have areas of growth, and I'm trying to put those together in kind of a imperfect church system that doesn't always appreciate that. How are you wrestling with that?
Yeah, I think this feels like a conversation that you could have with probably quite a few church women, right? Women who have been leaders in churches, because you know, when you look at the statistics in the world of how women are represented, in populations, they aren't often. The higher you go up in leadership, the less women you see. That's even halved in women in church. So I think the conversation of how to find your role in a church environment, like there probably aren't a lot of us, but it is an important topic to have, because I think when you see the fullness of God, you see the fullness of the church. And having representation at a table that's making decisions about your spiritual being you get a fuller understanding when you have people of diverse backgrounds, genders. You know, you get that perspective from other voices at the table. And I know you guys are having conversations about equity in underrepresented people groups. And that's an important conversation to have. I feel like you guys are doing the work already. So when I think about serving and spiritual gifts, I think about conflict because I think that's what Jesus did, unfortunately, right? One of the things I'm studying this semester is the questions of Jesus. So I'm reading through the scriptures, and Jesus asked a lot of questions. He was asked a lot of questions, especially by, religious people, because they wanted to understand, what he was talking about. But he often asked questions in response. And I think about the first words of Jesus that are ever recorded in the Bible are actually a question. His mother found him in the temple after they had left him in Jerusalem. And he says to them, "Why are you looking for me? Don't you know that I had to be in my Father's house?" That was the first words of Jesus. She's like, "Hey, you've been lost. Why didn't you come home with us?" And Jesus is asking her a question. "Didn't you know I'd be here? Why didn't you know I'd be here?" Mm. Then if you fast forward to the first recorded sermon of Jesus, he stands up to speak in his hometown, and he quotes an ancient Old Testament verse. And he says that he came to set the people free. He came to feed this might be a pausing thing because maybe there'd be a benefit to actually saying the exact words.
Well, I just read it. in Isaiah. So he quotes
Thank
Isaiah.
you.
So he said, I came to set the captives free. I think it's Isaiah 61. So,
yes, in Luke 4, right?
Yeah. Luke 4.
So he goes to his hometown of Nazareth, and he stands up to read the scroll from the prophet Isaiah. And he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." I don't know, that seems pretty significant to me.
Say more.
So the last year has been really hard because, as you said, I'm an Enneagram 8 as a female. I was very invested in a church community, this church community that I love and adore. And I moved to a new position at Northeastern Seminary in the middle of a pandemic. And then on top of that, I'm faced with, at home, like we all were, racial injustice. And I'm thinking and processing these things in light of my new seminary degree. And I'm thinking about, what is God calling me to do in the future in his church and in his world? How am I going to serve in a new way in 20 years, like you just asked a few minutes ago? I don't know what that will look like. But I'm willing to fight the fight now. And I think I used to think that was a negative thing. But when I see Jesus, when I read the words, when I study what I'm studying in my classes, Jesus was no wimp. He didn't just walk up on the cross. He spent 3 years fighting the fight. And before that, he lived in obscurity in a small town where no one knew his name. He spent 30 years where no one really knew who he was. And then for 30 years, he fought a fight that I think we often feel uncomfortable talking about.
So this is really interesting. Because that got sparked out of the conversation about the question about being prophetic, about being not a foreteller, because that's not necessarily what prophecy is, but you're speaking truth. You either want to speak truth or you want to help the people who are speaking truth. You like to be, like you said, you like to be a doer and make sure that the message is getting out there. The cameras are set up, the platforms are set up.
Sure.
So, but Peter brought up that word prophetic. And I'm hearing as you're talking a desire to speak truth, to proclaim, just as Jesus proclaimed and others in the Bible proclaimed. Mm-hmm. How did you get to the point where you felt like that was a passion for you. And I guess here's where I'm trying to go with this too is, how do you know, and I'm trying to think about what someone who's listening to this conversation, what might they be thinking? Like, what is the difference there between you have a talent for speaking versus, or for helping others speak versus a spiritual gift? Like, what does that even mean? Is that something that, does that mean that that God is building on something he's already given you when you were created?
That's a great question.
Or is it something that he kind of gives you when you need it?
Right.
So can you dive in that a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think one way to kind of compare spiritual gifts to like how we pray about things, we say, oh God, bring me my husband. I want to know if this person's my husband, right? We pray that specific prayer. But when we look at the Bible, we see that God never told anyone in the Bible who their specific spouse is. Not that he can't do that. I mean, there was a story of Isaac, right? Abraham sent his servant, and Isaac, or the servant was spoken to by God to choose that woman, Rebecca, for Isaac. But for the most part,
I guess Adam and Eve too.
Well, yeah, they didn't have any other choice.
There wasn't much of a choice there. Yeah, right.
But I think God gives us a lot of freedom to explore our options, right? Like, that's true of career or vocation. We think about these things. Is vocation the same as spiritual gifts? You could use your spiritual gifts in your vocation, but I don't think that a vocation is always, pastors have to be somewhat called. You felt you were called, Peter, right? Like, how was that experience of you deciding that you were going to be a pastor somewhere? That's a question that we all sort of wrestle with. And I think once I stopped fighting the personality tests, Aaron, because you talked about that a little bit.
I wouldn't say I'm fighting them, but
I'm there.
Cautious about
That's
them,
right.
sure.
So I had a mentor, Cynthia Woolbright. She's a great woman of faith who mentored me for a while. She had me take the DISC assessment. And the reason I fell in love with the DISC assessment is because it was a behavioral test. That's how she framed it. And behaviors can be changed. You can always change your behaviors. So I took this test, and that's sort of where that flame was fed a little bit, plus Peter's Enneagram, plus my kids started getting into Enneagram and understanding, who they were meant to be. And I think that is kind of, when you understand who you are and how God made you to be, and then you understand the choice that you have within that, I think that it's both and. It's God speaking to you, and it's you walking forth into areas that interest you, because that is God laying things on your heart. You talked about prophetic. Is God speaking something to your heart prophetic? How do you know when God is speaking to your heart? There's confirmation that happens from the people around you. You can't discover your spiritual gifts alone. You can't. It's impossible. Well, I don't know if it's impossible, because Adam and Eve, right? They were kind of alone. But I think that there is a lot of value in discovering these things in community. And, on top of being here and having the community at Browncroft, I led a Bible study for a long time. And we together uncovered a lot of truth and a lot of study and a lot of confession and prayer. And I think those things are really key to uncovering your spiritual gifts.
There's two things on my mind. I'm going to kind of go semi-controversial, and the reason you have the communications director in is he can edit this out if we need to. So, first of all, with spiritual gifts, we didn't really define it, and I want to hear your definition, but I like what you just said there, where there's probably less of a line between natural talent and how God uses it. I think we call it a spiritual gift because it's something that God has put in us, and it's how God works through us. So in the Bible, in 1 Corinthians, big surprise, like, you can imperfectly use your spiritual gifts. So you can read that, and it's these people thinking that they're operating in their spiritual gifts, and they're really causing a bunch of havoc in the church service. In college, Dr. Bruce Marino, this is for you. So we were talking about spiritual gifts, and Dr. Bruce Marino talks about, healing. So we're just going to go there. So I can have a friend in the hospital, and God could heal that person. Doesn't need my prayer, doesn't need anything. But what Dr. Marino said was, and again, healing's one of those weird spiritual gifts, is when I pray for someone to be healed, it's not that I have this gift like faith healers, but it's actually the realization God's working through me. So I'm all of a sudden part of this story and plan.
Sure.
And I think that that's kind of what spiritual gifts are. And, you know, I think it's probably good for us to come back to the serving, volunteering because someone needs help, but also serving, volunteering because I have a skill, because I think that's a good tension. But I think it's the realization that I'm joining God's story, not just in what he wants to do to me as an individual, but what he wants to do in a community.
Yeah.
I don't know, push back on that.
No, I think you're right. And I think the tendency is for someone in my demographic and older to think that we're the generation that's volunteering. We believed in that, right? There was big volunteer organizations when we were kids that we sort of grew up in. And volunteerism is sort of dying in some ways, right? But I think the younger generations, because they're asking spiritual questions at the same percentages that we are. That's Pew Research says that, right? They're not asking less spiritual questions, but they're asking them in different ways. And those ways might be looking at social justice issues where they feel that speaking up for people groups that are experiencing discrimination, that is their way of using their voices and using their gifts. So volunteering to them might even look like that. I think younger generations are unwilling to not get to the root of what they see are the issues. At least for my kids, and that's my experience with my 4 young adult kids, they're looking for a realness. They're looking for more conversations like this, like we're having now about, you know, what does Jesus really say? And they're exploring it in new ways that are powerful. I don't think the stuff that we're teaching now in churches, I didn't learn as a kid. You know, I didn't learn about poor people in America. I never thought about that stuff. I thought I was the poorest there was in America. We mixed powdered milk with real milk in our family. We thought we were so poor, right?
I didn't have a microwave till I was 13.
Exactly. Air conditioner, what was that? But I think our kids are thinking about equality in different ways. They're thinking about poor people. They're thinking about the world. They're thinking about issues confronting women in not only our country, but in countries where they have no education and no rights. I think that's a really amazing thing about the younger generation.
So for whether it's our generation, I say our, I mean, Peter is a little bit younger than me, so I don't know. But whether it's our generation or a younger generation, or, you know, what the spiritual gift assessments that are out there, like, like how does that help our generation, an older generation, a younger generation? How does it help inform how to get involved in church? Are they any good? do you have a favorite? And then, you know, how does it affect being involved in church and being involved in the church's ministry in a community?
That's a great question.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that this is something that we do well here. And I'm going to say we as the Browncroft community, right? We don't just find somebody and we say, oh, well, we need somebody to take care of babies in the nursery. We sit down with people. I know this is probably part of what Kim Igo does on a regular basis. Sits down with people and says, okay, what are you passionate about? Where, you know, do you like making coffee? Well, gosh, we have a place for you. You know, do you like saying hi to people in a parking lot? Gosh, we have a place for you. When you sit down and you find out what makes people tick and you make it about them, John Maxwell, I think, is the one who says this quote, if you do the right thing for the right reason with the right people, you will get the right results. So when you make something about yourself, so if the church makes it about themselves, they won't get the right results. But when the church makes it about the people, it makes it about what those people, that person sitting across the table from you, feels like they're called to do. And they might not know how to verbalize that, but a good pastor and a good what is Kim's role now? Director of
Next steps.
There we go. Like, she'll sit down and she'll ask good questions to uncover what makes that person tick. And I love Kim. She's great at what she does. I think she's an amazing human who loves people. She cares more about the relationship, not than Browncroft. She obviously loves Browncroft, but she cares more about the relationship. And that's really important to her. I love that. I love that about her.
So I want to come back to something you said. And again, I think you were saying this fluidly, not necessarily definitively.
Oh, you got to cut it out.
No. But so you're talking about 15, 20 minutes ago about serving versus like, I'm really good at this. And I think what I struggle with is Aaron and I work with a lot of digital stuff. And I think as a general whole, the church has improved digitally, but we're behind. Like, I think, there's people that know what they're doing. So if I meet someone that has this gift of communication, this gift of, I know like how to engage online, yeah, they can be a greeter or they can pick up the chairs because maybe they have the spiritual gifts of helps. But as a pastor, if that's what makes their heart sing, and if that's where the need is, and I think it's Friedrich Buechner that says like, where your passion meets the world's need is like,
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I struggle with is like, I want to put you in a place that you feel like you're in the zone. And sometimes that's actually like, I talk to people. So I'm just going to pretend Rebecca showed up at Browncroft. We'll say we're in California. Browncroft's in California, moved from Rochester, and you show up at the church that I'm pastoring, and you say, hey, I served a lot at a church. Sometimes what I'll ask you is just, hey, you know what? Do you want to be a part of this church before you get involved? What does that look? Because some people will say like their career that they do for 40 hours a week, like a CPA, I don't want to count the budget money like I want to do. And then there's other people that are like, oh my goodness, like I love to do this. You can't. So I just kind of feel this tension of I want you to serve and volunteer where it's helpful, but also like if we can find that sweet spot for you. I'm just kind of going back on that comment that you made about 20 minutes ago and how to process through that.
Yeah, I don't remember specifically, but I think what I just mentioned about finding what they want to do, right? It's like you might have a need to have small group leaders, but you know what? It's not about you, right? Like not you, the church, or you, the organization.
Well, like metrics are important.
Sure.
Let me say it. But like,
Sure.
I can't go to Rebecca and be like, I need 200 small group leaders. I don't really care what you do. That's what we're talking about.
And also people that do have a career that might be what they do for a vocation, but that might not be where they feel their spiritual gifts lie necessarily, right? So what you do for money might be different than what you feel like you're called to do. And I think we see a variety of that in the church. We also see a lot of that at Northeastern Seminary. We have people coming in who are doctors who now are becoming pastors later in life, or they were the CEO of a business and now they want to give back. And so they're exploring how to do that through their theological training.
So the people who come to the seminary in that situation, say someone, I know not everyone who goes to seminary is because they want to be a pastor. There's a lot of reasons to go to seminary. But let's say someone is kind of headed that direction as an example. How did they just feel a call to do that?
That's a great question.
Or or maybe they did feel a call to do that, but did they
Sure.
explore it through some reading or through, I guess I brought up the assessment test a few times, but is there something people do to get to that point where they feel like they're evaluating whether or not what direction they've been gifted in to go?
I think the question that we have on some of our tags on our printed materials is, who is God calling you to be? And I think the other side of that is what is God calling you to do? So it's both and I think that can change through seasons of life, right? Like the Bible says, Paul speaks in Corinthians about the hands and the feet and not to despise one another, right? But what if you were a hand early in life and you changed over to be a foot later in life? Like that, your role, your calling, your giftings might be used in different ways. And I do love spiritual assessment tests now. I took the Strength Finders test, which I don't know that it's a spiritual assessment per se, but it was written by a pastor, I believe. We took it last semester. And I think that taught me that some of my Enneagram traits of a challenger can be looked at in the light instead of just the negative as a difficult person. It can be looked at as also strategic. That is my top strength. So how can I be strategic in how I'm challenging people, challenging myself? How can I take what I think God has maybe put on my heart for an organization or for the work that I do and think strategically about that? And that has given me peace instead of just seeing the challenging side, because Enneagram sort of focuses on those negatives. Strength Finder has 0 negatives. It only covers your strengths, right? So it's almost like two sides of the coin of exploring perhaps what your strengths are and then perhaps some of the challenges that you face in your personality.
So I think what I hear both of you saying is assessments kind of get you into the mode to ask the right questions. And because I meet a lot of people that they say, I want to get involved in the church, but they don't know what that looks like.
Right.
So it's kind of, let's at least get you into a zone that maybe you could figure it out.
Right.
As opposed to, Rebecca comes to me and says, hey, I don't know, I want to get involved. And then I'm like, well, you should be a small group leader. And that could be completely wrong. That's
right.
Great. I don't know. Is that kind of, what about your experience, Aaron? Let's get to know you.
Man. All right. So Peter, I wasn't asking certain questions of you now, but I'm gonna, look out.
Amazing.
No, I think that assessments are very useful. I think that, Peter, just what you just said, they, in a lot of ways, they get you to ask the right questions and they get you to think about, if it's a personality assessment, I think it can help you see blind spots that we're just so used to ourselves that we don't see how someone else, especially someone else who's coming from a totally different personality, might see something you say or do or on a regular basis. And on the negative side, something you might not mean any harm by, but they take it that way. Or on the flip side, a strength that you might not see. So I think the strengths ones are useful. On the spiritual gift side, which I think maybe I'm trying to think about what someone who might be listening to this is thinking right now. They might not even know really. Some of us will know what we're talking about with spiritual gifts. There are certain passages in Paul's letters and whatnot, but there are assessments for that too. And again, that's useful. I think assessments can be useful, again, to ask questions. It helps you think about where your heart is, where your strengths are, where your heart is, where your mind is. And they're useful. I say I'm cautious about them because I think that sometimes we can box ourselves into things. And there's a place for, sometimes the Lord puts an opportunity in front of you to serve in a church or serve in a ministry or just go help a neighbor out next door with something that you're not necessarily good at. And then you can't just say, well, I'm not gifted in that, so I'm not going to go do that. There's a time to serve out of weakness too.
Right.
And I believe that if God is putting something in your way, he's going to equip you for that one way or another. So that's kind of where I come from on this stuff. But I do think there's a value there. And I do think that there are gifts that God gives us because it's very clear in Scripture that we do get gifts.
Right.
And how do we use them? So how do we lean into that?
We sat down the other day with two women serving in a church who are thinking about attending seminary. And one was very clearly able to articulate that God has called her to be a pastor. The other one said that she is the kind of person that her pastor looks at her and says, this is what we need. And this is what I think you could use your skill set doing for this time, because the church has a need. You have a skill set. This is what, and she's okay with that, right? So one woman clearly says, I am called to be a pastor. She feels God has spoken that to her in whatever ways. We didn't get into the specific ways that she has had confirmation in that way. But the other one says, well, I just wait. She's constantly being promoted because her leaders see the giftings in her. So maybe it's both and, right? It's not just one way of doing it. It's the assessments. It's the people around you. It's the things you feel God has put on your heart.
I was going to say that's so good, because that hits on what you said earlier about the value of community in recognizing these things. And then, I mean, assessments are outside things. That's kind of like reading books and whatnot too.
Yeah.
But then there's also, you gotta dig into the word yourself and be open to what God might have to talk to you personally about.
Right.
Too.
Agreed.
Well, and I want to come back. So first of all, I apologize for using the word difficult with Enneagram 8. I was trying to...
All the Enneagram 8s are going to write in.
Well, but when I hear... So like when I hear you talk about being an Enneagram 8, when I hear your number one strength is strategic, by the way, that's my number one strength.
Amazing.
You know, when I hear about like the DISC assessment, I actually feel on my end, I appreciate you more. Because, I mean, we love each other enough to say this. Like, we'd be in a meeting and all of a sudden Rebecca would be like, this is a huge problem. And I'm like, I don't think this is a huge problem.
Do people know we worked together for as long as we did, Peter? Is that a part of the podcast?
Now they do. But, like, looking back at that, I see how important that was. And knowing who you are actually informs community and how we work together.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I basically already said you were right earlier about the Enneagram. So I feel like you're throwing me a bone here, Peter.
Well, but that's something that even just, that's a whole nother podcast of, like, when I'm dealing with someone that feels more comfortable with conflict, and the older I get, I feel more comfortable with conflict. Like, there's a part of it where I need to lean into your spiritual gifts, your talents, and your abilities. Like, I look at someone like Aaron, you know, I freak Aaron out sometimes. Like, Aaron has we share the East House. Like, we call it the party house.
Amazing.
Because that's where the cool people are. That's our office building.
Alyssa's over there too,
yeah. So what happens is, like, I come downstairs and I'm like super excited. I see something. And what Aaron does is he's so kind and he'll be like, let me think about that. You know, because Aaron has some type of spiritual gift of analyzing. He'll sit with that.
Are you a 6? Do you know? Do you even know what you are?
I mean, I like to think I know a little bit about who I am, but I don't know what I am on the Enneagram.
Oh, you're gonna have
I'd
to
have
Google
lots
now.
of people guess things for me.
Well,
Which is not, you're not supposed to do. That's a pet peeve of the Enneagram. You're not supposed to type people.
and I never typed you. I hope listeners, but like one of the things is, not to throw out another, but like we just did the Genius from assessment from Patrick Lencioni, and one of Aaron's big like geniuses, which I think is is discernment, where like there's a moment that Aaron kind of steps into a meeting and says, I think we need to be careful. And I think that sometimes, like, it's not only about you realizing your spiritual gifts, it's about you even identifying and celebrating the people around you. So.
Well, and as you said earlier, Peter, you said we can use our gifts imperfectly, right? How many times have you heard someone say, oh, well, I have the gift of exhortation, and really they're just telling you whatever comes in their mind that's made them angry, right? Because they're exhorting you. I think that we have to be careful to make sure we're staying in our strengths and our giftings too, right? Gifting does not equal strength. They are not the same thing. Your gifting doesn't necessarily mean that you're always operating out of the right mind. And Enneagram touches on that, right? You have areas, when you're a number 8, you can operate in a healthy 8 or and their wings, I don't see, I'm not quite there yet, Peter. I know you know what I'm talking about without even clarifying.
Well, let's kind of close with these two questions. This conversation's gone really fast. We probably could do another 2 hours. You know, this is, again, our hope is just to throw a microphone as if we're having coffee. But I'm guessing many of our listeners are feeling this paralysis by analysis. Like, I want to make a difference. maybe I feel like like what you said, I want to be a voice, but other people are saying, I want to get involved.
Right.
And we celebrate stories of people that start stuff, but we don't always celebrate the stories of people that are like, hey, Mike Peace from Bethel Express, I'm just going to show up. Like for a year, I'm just like, what would you say, I'm going to ask both of you, to those that are experiencing the paralysis by analysis of what's their next step?
I think it's a good question, because I think that's something that we also see at Northeastern Seminary. People are trying to figure out what is next for them. So I think that's a good question. Aaron, do you have a? I'm going to pass the response.
Pass the baton over.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good question. I think it's important to take time to discern and to analyze. I mean, I know that's important to me, but there's also a time to make a decision and move forward too, or just show up. Like you said, I mean, there are plenty of things that people just need other people to show up for, and that by itself makes a difference. So I think that you can do both, and sometimes, probably actually a lot of times, you learn more about who you are when you're and what you're supposed to be doing when you're in the midst of. I mean, you brought up the example of Jesus earlier, when Jesus called disciples to himself, and he just had them do stuff with him, and they, in the course of time, they learned more about themselves, either through the working of that process, or sometimes, like Jesus said to Peter, like he gave him pretty direct, you know, he called him a rock, and that.
He also called him Satan. Get behind me,
well,
Satan. I think.
He had to, correct the negative stuff too, but he also built into him.
Agreed.
And also to the other disciples too. But
so good
as an example. So yeah.
Yeah, and that, I think that there are tools that you can use, like assessment tests. There are tools that you can use, like the people around you. Talking to people who are experts in their field. JP my boss at work, sits down with so many people and has conversations about what might be their next step, right? Peter, you must be doing it all the time too, and talking to people about how to get involved in community here. And I think that those are valuable conversations. It is about relationships. People can YouTube how to do anything in the world, right? You can probably get an entire seminary education and every sermon under the planet's on YouTube, I bet. But they come here, they come to college because they're looking for more than that, right? So spiritual giftings are uncovered in community, just like reading the Bible is done better. Understanding the Bible is done better in community when you're in conversations with people who are different than yourself, who are similar to yourself. You start to see the word in a fullness that cannot be done when you're sitting alone doing it by yourself. So...
Look at you promo episode 1 of this series from Dr. David Carr. Look at that, man. Man. Well, hey, we're going to close with this last question. We kind of were there. What would Jesus say about it? So the cool thing about this is if Aaron and I speak any heresy, now that you're in seminary, you can correct us.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So
we're counting on you guys.
We're counting on it, I didn't go to Northeastern. I went to Valley Forge. And those Pentecostals, you gotta... Am I allowed to joke like that?
Yes, you are.
You say whatever you want. I'll let your alumni association call you.
There you go.
I love Valley Forge. And they know I do. So, hey, what does Jesus have to say? Who's starting, you or me?
I can start.
Go ahead.
Sure. I think it's very. I think the scriptures are very clear. So I think that Jesus does give us gifts. The Lord equips us for whatever tasks that he has for us to do. I think that getting to this conversation, like there's ways that we can explore. We were just talking about that, explore more about what those giftings are, whether it's whether there is a preaching gift there or there is a helps gift. You mentioned helps or administration, there's a number of different ways that the body of Christ, the church, works together and and it's in that diversity that there's strength. I mean, that's where that's the beauty of the giftings. But I think also there's an element of you just need to, like we said, you just have to get involved, show up, serve, and in that process and in community with our people, as well as your own personal reflection time, then we learn more about ourselves. So I think that we need to. I think what Jesus would have wanted us to do is to get involved, get plugged into Him, and get plugged into where He wants us to be.
Man, that's really good. The word in the Bible that they use for spiritual gifts is charismata, where we get the word charismatic, and I think charismatic probably has more negative connotations because it's charismatic leader and stuff like that. But what it literally means in Greek is grace gift. So, when you're using the talents, the gifts, the abilities that God gave you, you're literally offering Jesus's grace to other people. And if you keep that as a mission, I feel like that's exactly what Jesus did, whether you serve in a need that's kind of outside your comfort zone or you serve in a sweet spot. But the second thing I want to say is, if you're going to study this in the Bible and you want to get more aware, there's a list in 1 Corinthians, there's a list in Romans, but my favorite passage is in 1 Peter because there's no list. Peter says...
Has nothing to do with your name.
It has nothing to do with my name. So anyways, but it just says, whatever spiritual gift you have, use it. And I wonder if at the end of the day, what Jesus is saying, I'm giving you an opportunity to be part of my story, to give grace in a world full of chaos that desperately needs it. So why don't you use what you got? Use what I gave you. So that's
so
my
good.
thoughts.
I love it. As a doer, as a chronic doer, I want to think about the things that Jesus did and the things that He said and how He treated people. And I think since He is the perfect human and a perfect God in one, it's an interesting exploration that I'm in the middle of now of watching what Jesus said, watching what He did, and trying to be more like that. Perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love does a whole lot of great, amazing things, and I think Jesus did that well. And I feel like that is the ultimate spiritual gift, figuring out how to do that, right? Love.
I just want to, I want to kind of call out, because I think this is important for our listeners. Someone that's more of a discerner and thinker says, hey, take that next step. And someone that's more of a doer says reflect. And I think that's just...
Interesting.
I think that's just maturity. Anyways,
so good.
This is the final episode of our Northeastern series. We're going to have more people from Northeastern. Love it.
Yeah, we got to have you guys come over sometime.
Hey, who knows? Maybe
we'll look forward to it.
Maybe we'll do a live show there. Who knows?
So good.
If it's on tape, we have to do it. Anyways, but Rebecca, how can people find you?
Northeastern Seminary is the name of our institution. nes.edu is our website, and my email will be in the show notes.
Can people follow you on?
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Rebecca 4 Pics, is that?
Yep, Rebecca 4 Pics on both Facebook and Instagram.
All right. Hey, thank you so much for joining us.